So in a previous episode, we covered the definition of a green job. We also covered the categories of green jobs and went through the enabling environment of factors that are required for any country to truly succeed in the creation of green jobs. I would like to reiterate that at Jacob's Ladder Africa, we are committed to catalyzing 30 million jobs in the green economy by 2033. We intend to do that through diverse ways, which you will hear throughout the various episodes that we will be bringing to you. But today we get to begin by drilling down on one of the sectors that has the highest potential, in my view, one of the highest potential to be able to create and generate green jobs. My name is Sellah Bogonko, co-founder and CEO of Jacob's Ladder Africa, and this is Green Jobs Africa. Now, as discussed in a previous episode, we went through different kinds of sectors to identify the 5 that are the top emitters when it comes to carbon emissions. And we say that that ranges from energy to agriculture, building, industry, and transport. But in that order, and some would argue, but in that order, generally speaking, energy is the highest contributor. And this is because fossil fuels contribute over 75% of greenhouse gas emissions and 90% of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So how do we address the issue of carbon emissions? Or rather, we cannot address the issue of carbon emission reduction without addressing the issue of energy. And that's where we would like to start, because we see the opportunity right there for the African continent. Answer some of the facts that you need to know when it comes to fossil fuels. First of all, by definition, fossil fuels ranges from coal, oil, and gas. And that's depletable in its nature. It's the kind of energy that is produced through the extraction of this kind of resources from the environment, or from the earth rather. And in the process of extracting the coal, the oil, and the gas, it results to a lot of emissions, especially when it's burnt and the greenhouse gases are emitted into the atmosphere. And so from the 1800s, as we mentioned in our previous episodes, there was increased industrialization. And the more we industrialized, the more we were dependent on fossil fuels. And many of the developed countries have actually thrived and been able to develop on the backbone of fossil fuels. And that's where the issue normally is when it comes to the disparity between those that have already developed on the backbone of fossil fuels vis-a-vis those that are developing right now, when there's already a significant amount of carbon emission reduction that needs to happen. And so in the conversation, the global conversations, the push is that because you cannot reduce carbon emissions in one country and then leave the other one, we are all affected equally when it comes to the current emissions. But some countries have contributed more significantly than others. For example, the US has contributed close to 25% of the carbon emissions currently. And obviously that's attributed to their fast industrialization and their huge industries. And China has also been on that pathway as well. And so some of these global superpowers have been requested, and there's been a push and a demand from civil society to other governments to be able to have them contribute towards the developed countries or developing countries being able to address their issues when it comes to the effects of climate change, like floods and drought. Again, it all boils back down to fossil fuels. So in addressing fossil fuels, we need to be able to know that if that is tackled in a more concerted way globally, there will be a significant reduction of the carbon emissions that we're currently experiencing across the world. And so how do we do that? It's been said that there's a need to be able to begin to look at renewable sources of energy. And there are 4 categories of renewable sources of energy. You have the sun, you have the wind, you have naturally flowing water, and then you have geothermal. I bet you that for the many African young people that are listening to me, you're thinking, but we have that in our country. Why can't we develop, or why can't we produce or develop projects that are either geothermal based, or geothermal projects, solar projects, or wind projects and all that? You can, but it takes money, and we'll get there. So in a bid to address the issue of reducing the reliance on fossil fuels, and I'm sure you've seen this all over social media, a lot of campaigns to be able to have the companies, especially the oil and gas companies, pay a hefty tax when it comes to carbon emissions. That's why the taxation, conversation is being channeled and pushed specifically towards the oil and gas companies and oil and gas producing countries. In Africa, back home, there's some major fossil fuel producing countries. And obviously we know that one of the highest is Nigeria. And then you have South Africa that is heavily reliant on coal. There are many others that are high producers or highly reliant on oil and gas, and some on coal. And like I said in a previous episode, there are many more African countries that are discovering oil. And the question is, why should we not adopt or extract or exploit this oil resource? Because it's going to help us develop, especially because it's a globally, highly demanded global resource. Especially now, with the global supply chain being affected with the war in Ukraine and the de-dollarization, there's a need to, leverage whatever resources you have for you to be able to benefit or to get ahead as a country. And so that introduces a lot of dilemma between, do we industrialize using renewable energy, or do we go back to fossil fuels, or do we continue on the pathway of fossil fuels? And that's where something called Just Energy Transition programs come in, JETP in short. If you've heard of it, this is exactly what it is. Transition basically means that rather than drastically dropping the issue of production of oil and gas and coal, many countries are saying we'd rather go through the process of progressively reducing our reliance or the extraction of fossil fuels and increasingly increase our production of renewable energy. But there's a whole challenge around that. Again, like I said, it's political, it's business, it's economic, and it's social because of the challenge around the beneficiaries when it comes to the resource that is called fossil fuels. But on the other hand, you have renewable energy. And like we've said, this would be a staggering statistics. We have said it in the past, but for those who do not know, Africa is home to 40% of the world's renewable energy potential. Think about it. When it comes to solar, wind, naturally flowing water, and geothermal, it's largely deposited within the African continent. And so the question begs that why wouldn't we develop when it comes to renewable energy? There is a push and there is a need. But there's a huge disparity when it comes to the investments that are being made in the renewable energy sector. By 2023, actually, this year, the amount of investments that were being made in the renewable energy sector was $1.3 trillion. But how much of that, or what percentage of that, is found in the African continent or has been made in the African continent? Less than 2%. And that again begs the question of, are we really serious as a globe when it comes to reduction of carbon emissions? Because it does sound like common sense. If there is huge deposits or huge opportunity to reduce the reliance on fossil fuels, then the investment should be channeled towards the continent or the countries that can be able to help us achieve that. But that's not the case right now, which always brings back the question of the level of commitment by the global north when it comes to carbon emissions and our commitment towards decarbonization of the world. But leaving the issue of investments on one side, let's get back to the way in which jobs can be created in the renewable energy sector. So you probably went to school, you're an engineer, or you did math, or you did geography, and you're wondering, okay, so if energy is going to be the largest contributor when it comes to creation of green jobs, how do I, as a current mid-career professional already in the energy space, transition from what I'm doing right now in the oil and gas space, if you're already in that space, from a brown job into a green job? Well, there are many opportunities that are emerging, especially in the training sector, where you can acquire the skills that are required for you to be able to play a role or for you to be able to get a job in the renewable energy space. Let's say you're already in the brown space and this is fossil fuels, oil and gas. You could acquire some form of training or certification or whatever skill sets that is required for you to be a geothermal engineer or a green hydrogen engineer, which is another huge opportunity and sector that is emerging beautifully in this continent. You could acquire the skills by either going to school or even interning or finding a way of positioning yourself for this emerging sector, because it's emerging now, but it will be the sector that will be the largest, one of the largest employers in a couple of years to come. That's one way of doing it, the transition process. The other one is you're probably going to high school right now and you're thinking, this could sound interesting. If by the time I'm going to, finish my high school or finish my college or university education, renewable energy will be one of the highest employers, then choose a career that will align you towards renewable energy. And if you are still a little bit not clear, This is the age of information, so do a bit of research around what are the kind of programs that would enable you to play or to find a job in the renewable energy space. And besides that, like we said, that in the production of energy, there are many kinds of categories of jobs. You could find that there are certain kinds of programs, even when it comes to retrofitting. For example, the UK adopted a program that is called Retrofit. And in this case, they decided to target a certain amount of homes that would be retrofitted with solar panels. That naturally increases the demand for solar panels because they do not even have as much sun as we do in Africa, but they're already doing something about it. And so the increase in the demand for solar panels introduces industry in terms of production or manufacturing of solar panels. Now, for us in Africa, we have the nickel and the cobalt and the raw materials that are required for the production or manufacturing of solar panels. But what are we doing? I don't even think we have an existing solar panel manufacturing industry or factory. We do have assemblies where, solar panels are assembled, but I do not know, and I could be wrong. I do not know of any major brand that is set up here to specifically manufacture solar panels. Countries like Germany are world leaders. China are world leaders when it comes to solar, but where do they get the raw materials? Africa. They do not have the sun and they do not have the raw materials, but they're the ones supplying us with the solar panels. If this is going to be an emerging sector, we ought to be the suppliers because we have the raw materials, the critical minerals that are required for that. Same to batteries. When it comes to e-mobility, you'll definitely need batteries, and these batteries are largely produced by sources or minerals that are also found on the continent. And the same applies to so many other sectors. Why can our countries, our leaders, not create platforms to enable the creation or the manufacturing of these solar panels on the continent and then become suppliers and even use it locally at home? Because unfortunately, out of the 1.2 billion people on the African continent today, 600 million of them do not have access to electricity of any kind. And then 970 million of them do not have access to clean cooking. This is a huge opportunity. And yes, there are many people that are getting into that space, but it is still a huge opportunity for many of the young people out there who could come up with ideas, but also many of the businesses who could diversify into that space. We have a lot going for us, and most of it, honestly, is God-given. An unfair competitive advantage. You cannot create the sun, for example. You cannot create the wind or the naturally flowing water that enables us to create hydro projects or mini projects. But these are things that we've already been given and are available to us, that if we take advantage of them and maximize on them, we could create a lot of jobs. And in this case, we're talking about millions of jobs for our many unemployed and, for the most part, helpless young people. So that's the energy space. What else can be done? So there could be the engineering space, there could be the support space, like I said, in the retrofitting. And these are, like I explained, ways of adopting, in the current space where we can move from just depending purely on fossil fuels and begin to move towards renewable energy. As I've said many times before, the climate crisis is a leadership opportunity, and a leadership opportunity especially for our political leaders, our heads of state and prime ministers and presidents. This is an opportunity for you to address the single most challenging in the African continent today, if not globally, and that is the unemployment rate. It's worse for us on the African continent because 40% or 25% rather of the world's population will be residing in Africa by 2050, which means that we are sitting on a time bomb if we do not address the issue of youth unemployment. Our population currently is at a median age of 19.1, and that age apparently is only getting younger. And the younger the population, the more active and agile, and we know what happens when they are idle in terms of not meaningfully engaged. So we have a golden opportunity in front of us. Let's devise programs and solutions around the different sectors, but most specifically, even as we discuss just energy transition programs, we must look at it from a job creation perspective. Look at Nigeria, for example. How can a country of 150 million people still be heavily reliant on fossil fuel, which is depleting in this case for them and currently being challenged across the globe? And the more the push around reduction on reliance on fossil fuels, the more the need to go towards the renewable energy. So I know that Nigeria recently unveiled or revamped its Just Energy Transition Program. but it has to have a job creation angle, because that is one of the largest or most populated country on the continent. The other one is South Africa. Again, a country that is heavily reliant on coal and still is not able to have stable energy. But imagine the introduction of the creation of policies and investment in education systems, or availing of finance to enable the development of renewable energy projects. That would go a long way in addressing the issue of unemployment, which sadly in South Africa currently stands at almost 20%, one of the highest, if not the highest, on the continent. There are many ways in which we can address the issue of unemployment. Energy is our silver bullet. I hope and pray that one day some people will wake up and say, yes, we do need to industrialize, but let's not just think about the current state where we are right now. Leadership is about charting a path to a future that enables people to follow you into it. We must be able to see not just where we are right now and planning for the duration of the term in office. There must be vision that goes beyond the term in office to be able to say, if the future is green, we must be able to leverage and take advantage of what is already our competitive advantage, specifically in the renewable energy sector, and create jobs for our young people. Because these young people, if they get the opportunities right now, are the ones that are going to be able to create the industries and the businesses that we need to employ the quarter of the planet that will be living on this continent in 2050. I hope that you've been encouraged, challenged, and I hope you do share the same views as me. And if you don't, I'd love to hear your views. If you do, please share your views and your comments on the section below. We'll get to read them, respond to them if there are questions, and I'm happy to engage in this conversation, because I think that, like I said, renewable energy is our silver bullet. Thank you so much for watching, and for the many subscribers that are coming on and just following us through the various episodes and giving us the encouragement, the contributions, sharing your views and letting us know that you do actually see this opportunity just as we do. This is a long journey, and we hope that you can come along with us, because I think that we could do a lot more together rather than apart. So if you do have comments, please continue to make them on the comment section below. DM us if you're doing a project, especially on green jobs. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to highlight some of the projects that are being done, especially on the continent. That is what we're all about here on Green Jobs Africa. My name is Sellah Bogonko, the co-founder and CEO of Jacob's Ladder Africa, and this is Green Jobs Africa.